Video 2, June 7th. So we have just heard excerpts from Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech, and some of it to a modern ear is absolutely shocking. For example, the use of the word pickaninny, which is the equivalent of calling a child a nigger. It's for black children, old speech. That's some nasty stuff from a modern point of view. Oh yes, I use that word because I'm talking about racism. I get to do that as a teacher. We have gotten to such a point where some people reflexively can't hear that word unless it's coming out of a black face or in a rap song. No, I am not going to censor myself when speaking about racism with that word. That's nuts. I'm not doing it. And I recommend that you think very carefully if your reaction is that no one should ever use that word. Well, in trying to discourage people from being racistic and talking about the history of racism, how can one not? Having said that, this deals with some pretty vivid feelings today, because our society is also divided by questions of immigration. The problem that Powell had, and that Powell's supporters had, was that without being consulted, without being asked, suddenly their society was filled with strange tongues, strange people, strange ways. And the official establishment at the time refused to have a conversation, refused to give credence to anyone who had a problem with this, instead simply blithely naming them racists, which is a way of suppressing conversation, not having it. Instead of trying to convince free people in Britain that immigration was useful and necessary and good, they used the demagogue trick of demonizing anyone who would question their policy, no matter what effects it had, in terms of an increase in crime, an increase in violence, an increase in the insecurity of people within their homes, the changing character of schools, of churches, of communities. All of this stuff matters. And if you want to stand there as a modern person and simply say, well, that's just ignorant, I suggest you live in a neighborhood that has this going on. Most of the people who are sanctimonious about this are so damn wealthy, they never personally experience it. I'm from the Bronx. I lived this. I lived this in Connecticut in a multiracial community. I was a minority in elementary school and in middle school, in that even though I am Hispanic, I look white, I sound white. If there is a sudden influx of foreign people to your society unannounced, you have no chance to begin to come to terms with it. If this happens without a political debate, you feel like the government is harming you. A government that should be protecting you and protecting your communities has turned on you. And if every time you raise concerns, some sanctimonious leader calls you a racist for even questioning this, no, it's not about racism. It's about culture. None of these people, or very few of these people, would have a problem with people of different colors if those people of different colors adopted their culture, their language. Most Americans don't have a problem with the idea of people immigrating to this country as individuals if they're willing to learn English, if they're willing to get jobs. But when people are settled by Catholic charities, like in Lewiston, Maine, 2,000 Somali immigrants in 2 months, none there, then 2,000 are there in a single neighborhood, and all of them go onto welfare right away. They form a ghetto that outsiders are not welcome in. They don't leave the ghetto. They don't have to get jobs. They don't have to learn English. This is not the American pattern of immigration. This is something new. And that pattern is being repeated in other cities and other towns with other ethnicities. For a group of immigrants to be settled and immediately go on public assistance allows that group to self-ghettoize, allows that group not to have to function in the broader society. And without the need to function in broader society, why bother? You quickly learn the lesson Your community leaders cry racism whenever anyone challenges any of this. Now, that's not racism. That's waving the bloody shirt. Waving the bloody shirt is something that Republicans did after the Civil War. After the Civil War, Republicans pointed out that it was Democrats in the North and the South that perpetuated slavery, that the Democratic Party opposed fighting the Civil War in the North, that Democrats in the South, when they took power, established Jim Crow regimes. And waving the bloody shirt was Republicans saying, if you vote for Democrats, then Johnny died for nothing. Now that's based in truth, but it's also demagoguery. Instead of debating with the Democrats over their policies, Republicans waved the bloody shirt, and it won them election after election, except for two presidents, Grover Cleveland and Woodrow Wilson. From the beginning of the Civil War all the way to Franklin Roosevelt in the Depression in 1932. Republicans dominated the presidency except for Cleveland and Wilson. That's a big deal. The bloody shirt was a very powerful thing. Well, in Britain in the 1960s, and today in the United States, the charge of you're a racist is used with so little justification, so quickly, so frequently. It's not about finding out whether somebody's really a racist. Usually the person who makes that charge knows full well that the other person is not a racist, would be horrified if they actually were found to be a racist. No, it's designed to say, shut up and do what you're told. Put on your mask and obey. That's not wise policy. And it created an atmosphere in Britain that led to Brexit in 2016. Because another wave of immigrants, this time from the Middle East, were crossing into Europe and were being settled by the European Union without reference to local conditions, the will of local people, without plans to assimilate. These people immediately went on to welfare, and there was no assimilation, no compromise. So Londonistan is a place that the bobbies, the British police, don't go unless they go in numbers. Race politics? Yeah, there's race politics involved, but not the politics of white supremacy, the politics of immigrant rights, the right to come unannounced, the right to come without invitation, the right to come and be supported by the local taxpayers, and the right to excoriate anyone in the local community who objects. You decide how wise a policy that is. Powell's speech is an angry one. And some of the things that he says are ugly. They are. But I bring it up because it's an aspect of decolonization that changes Europe. To this day, every few years, around Paris and around cities in Germany, immigrant neighborhoods erupt into violence that can last weeks. Cars burned, neighborhoods burned, assaults on anyone who's not of the ethnic group. Oh yes, racism exists in every group. Shifting away from Europe. What is the third world? The third world is a term that gains cachet in the 60s and 70s. The first world is the free world. The free markets, United States, Britain, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, for a while South Africa. That's the first world, the developed world. The second world is the communist world. Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, China. The second world is not as developed, not as advanced, more authoritarian. The third world are the former, and you should write this down, the third world are the former European colonies that have been given independence. The former European colonies that have been given independence. The former European colonies that have been given independence. That is the third world. So, they are not the developed world, nor are they the communist world. They have their own native customs before contact. They have their own experience. All of the rest of the world has 3 ages, and you should know this. All of the rest of the world has 3 different eras. The first era is pre-contact. and that's pre-contact with the Europeans. The second era is empire, when they are colonies. The third era is post-independence. Post-independence is after the 1950s, 60s, or 70s. And the only country, well, let's see. So pre-contact could be things as different from India, where you have a Hindu civilization thousands of years old, going back to Ashoka, and China, which also goes back thousands of years until its era where Hong Kong is a British colony and the so-called Century of Shame, to a place like Zimbabwe, which is completely tribal, and where there are two groups at point of contact, the Shona and the Ndebele, or the Mashona and the Matabele. So pre-contact can be almost anything. All of the world, from the late 1800s until the mid to late 1900s, basically from the 1880s through the 1960s, is brought directly or indirectly under some kind of European control. The only countries that aren't is the proverbial handful. China's not directly, but it's under European influence like crazy. Ethiopia, or Abyssinia as it's then called, is independent, but it basically is an isolated area. So is Tibet. It's independent and it's isolated. Liberia is a West African country ruled by former American slaves who treat the natives like second-class citizens, even though they're blacks who have been returned to Africa. They're Americanized. They're more developed. There's a fifth country somewhere in there. Latin America, ruled by European elites, Europeanized elites. And then post-independence, what do they do after getting independence? So let's look at Sub-Saharan Africa and one country here, Ghana. Ghana is the former British Gold Coast. Ghana's capital is Accra, a city on the coast. Beautiful fortress sticking out on a small peninsula. Ghana, the British Gold Coast, is the experiment for all of this. 2 years after Suez, in 1957-58, so 1 and 2 years after Suez, Ghana is given stages towards complete independence. By 1958, it's independent. Its leader is a British educated fellow named Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah is the president or the prime minister of Ghana within the British Commonwealth. Within, 10 years, actually within 8 years, school children in Ghana are singing praises to their Messiah, Kwame Nkrumah. Not to their president, not to their prime minister, not to their king, their Messiah. Nkrumah insists upon being treated as a living god. His tribe and cronies are given every advantage. Those people who are enemies or outside of his inner group are treated like property. Ghana's economy, which had been reasonably thriving under the British, they sold things like cacao beans and ground nuts, agriculture, but tropical goods, suddenly is a basket case. And while the president lives like a living god, his people live in squalor. Those structures, the railroads, the cities, the water systems, the electrical grid that the British had built begin to fall apart, and there aren't people to fix them. Eventually, the Messiah Nkrumah is overthrown by a military dictatorship, and a series of different governments take power, are given power after that. Like the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, what had been a multi-party democracy, a parliamentary democracy, at independence becomes the rule of a single dictator, in this case Nkrumah, and then the rule of other dictators who seize power by force. We'll leave things there. Next time, we are going to talk further about the Third World. Before I go, questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, thank you.